What's happening here is quite unprecedented. We're seeing a very slow motion, disastrous ending for Boris Johnson, but he's still not actually accepted that this is the end for him. As recently as last night and even this morning, we were hearing from Downing Street that he was planning to do a cabinet reshuffle and plug all the gaps from all of those ministers who were resigning. We started really yesterday with the big resignations of Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the Treasury Minister here, and also also Sajid Javid, who is the Health Secretary. They resigned, and that triggered off a sort of avalanche of other resignations. I think we're 55 or so at the moment, including some cabinet members, including junior ministers and ministers. So this is really quite unprecedented. They're all begging Boris Johnson to leave. Even Nadhim Zahawi, who he shuffled immediately from being the education minister to being the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, had actually asked him to resign last night privately and said that fell on deaf ears. He's now published a letter this morning, just in the last few minutes, in which he says that he wants Boris Johnson to leave. He's now saying it publicly. He says he's heartbroken that he hasn't listened and that he's now undermining the incredible achievements of this government at this late hour. He said no one will forget getting Brexit done, keeping a dangerous anti-Semite out of number 10, our handling of COVID and our support for Ukraine in its hour of need. But he just says it's time to go. And frankly, the rumours that Boris Johnson is now preparing a resignation speech behind the door of 10 Downing Street seems very likely. But whether or not he's going to read it or try and dig in with a bunker mentality further remains to be seen.
Tell us a little bit about the, obviously the health secretary and the finance minister who did resign. They were furious about the botched handling of the resignation by Johnson's former deputy chief whip, Chris Pincher. So tell us a little bit more about that. Just delve into it for our viewers.
So the Christopher Pincher affair is really the sort of last piece here, the final straw that broke the camel's back. He was the deputy chief whip, and he resigned because he said to the Prime Minister that he'd got very drunk and groped two men the night before in a private members club. It then became part of the news cycle that there had actually been allegations about his sexual misconduct previously, and that Boris Johnson might have known about them even before he appointed him deputy chief whip. So plenty of people were asking why he would have made that appointment. And in the process of that, Boris Johnson said he wasn't aware of the allegations. That changed to not being aware of specific allegations. Eventually, that changed to saying he was aware, but he'd forgotten about them when he appointed him the deputy chief whip. And I think that chain of events made many in the party who'd been loyal to him up until then just realised that they can't keep going out and spinning the lines that they were given by Downing Street in the media without it making them look bad. Because if the Prime Minister was changing his story that frequently, many call it lying, they felt that it reflected badly on them, badly on their party, and also badly on Parliament in general. And that's really what those two resignations said, along with Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, saying that he was due to announce new economic policy with Boris Johnson in the next few days, but that it had become apparent to him that they just didn't agree on economic policy, and so he wasn't able to do that either. This means that Boris Johnson really is left with very few allies within the party, because that's just one of the recent controversies. There was one quite recently about how he had tried to appoint his mistress, now wife, as a chief of staff when he was in the Foreign Office as the Foreign Secretary, even though she was perhaps not qualified, and he was having an extramarital affair with her and was stopped from doing that by people internally. All of these sorts of controversies have just contributed to a reputation that's now in tatters for Boris Johnson, and members of his own party have stopped thinking of him as the magician who can win elections despite these colourful bits of his character, and started thinking of him as a liability. And that's just tipped the balance with dozens and dozens of resignations, leaving him really in an impossible position now. It's not clear how he could even try to fill all the gaps when he has so few people of the right calibre left to put into post.
Also, Jonathan, if you have any idea at all, what are polls telling us at the moment? Does the public want him to resign?
I think generally, I haven't looked at the polling from this morning or anything like that, but it is the case that Boris Johnson's reputation is in tatters, not just within his own party, but with much of the electorate. I think that's why members of the Conservative Party are actually now making this move. I think they've tipped over the edge as well. Part of the problem, though, is, of course, that Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party, doesn't have as good ratings as he ought to. He's been in place for about 2 years, replacing Jeremy Corbyn, who had been a disaster for that party, eventually losing that general election. But some say that he just hasn't made enough of a mark, and polling on him shows that even among Labour voters, they just don't know what he stands for. Indeed, he has his own controversies, because having gone to town, let's say, on Boris Johnson's rule breaking during lockdown and the fine he received for gatherings within Downing Street when they were illegal, it then came out that Keir Starmer was pictured having a beer and a meal with colleagues during the lockdown period. He's being investigated by the police for that. And he has tried to contrast himself with Boris Johnson by saying that if the police do fine him, he'll step down as party leader. Now, that hasn't been decided yet, but if the police do indeed decide that he broke the law, we may be in the situation where he steps down as leader of the Labour Party, Boris Johnson may be replaced as leader of the Conservative Party, meaning both parties could have new leaders. Elections aren't due, general elections, for another couple of years here. So whoever takes over from Boris Johnson will in fact have that time left to be Prime Minister. Whether or not they can call an early election for any reason is another piece of speculation. But really, the situation is quite messy here, and nobody can say what's going to happen over the next few hours, never mind the next few weeks.
And what would the steps involve if Boris were to resign eventually, Jonathan?
Well, if Boris Johnson were to resign, there's a couple of options that could happen here. One is that he could be kicked out. So there's a backbench committee of the Conservative Party called the 1922 Committee. They make the rules for the party's internal decisions. Now, they had a vote of confidence, which was triggered by enough members of the parliamentary party asking for one, which Boris Johnson won not that long ago. That should protect him for a year from another one of those elections, of those votes. However, there could be a change of executive within that committee, and they could then, with the new executive, if the right people are on it, decide to change that rule so that he can actually be put to another vote of confidence much sooner. So if they then did that and he lost that vote of confidence, they'll trigger a leadership election. But of course, Parliament is going on summer recess quite soon. So getting a lot of this done before then is also a bit of a race against time for those who want to pursue that route. Boris Johnson may yet just decide that it's time to step down now without going through that process. There are certainly plenty in Downing Street advising him of that at the moment. And the rumours are that there are two factions within Downing Street now, some writing his resignation speech for him and others encouraging him to hang on and just keep going, which seems like an increasingly impossible proposition for him now. But if he steps down, then it could be that he steps down with immediate effect. He'd have to go to the Queen and suggest a replacement for him. Could be the Dominic Raab, who deputised for him when he was in hospital with COVID. However, if Dominic Raab wants to run as party leader, it seems unlikely that it would be a good idea to put him in place as interim leader. It could be Theresa May, even some have suggested, because there's no question really that she would like to run again, but she has done the job before. So we're really in uncharted territory in that respect as well. Or he could stay on as an interim leader. Obviously, he'll be a bit of a lame duck, but that is something that we're used to as well in similar situations. Happened to Theresa May, and that might be his opportunity, as she did, to try and build a bit of a legacy unconnected to all the things that have been going on recently, unconnected to the controversies. Maybe he'll just try to build a bit of a legacy so that people might remember him for something other than this slow motion car crash of the end of his time as the party leader and prime minister.
I know that you say that he could stay on as interim leader. There's just been a report published now by the political correspondent from the BBC. I'll just read it out. It says Boris Johnson will resign as Conservative leader today, and he will continue as Prime Minister until the autumn. Is that true, that last bit of the statement, that he will stay on as Prime Minister until the autumn?
Well, I think it would be a more normal turn of events for him to stay in place until the Conservative Party actually put somebody else there as party leader, because that just encourages stability. It means that there is still somebody running the country at what is a very difficult time, not just for the UK, but the whole world. You know, we can't forget that with all of this political drama going on here in the UK, there's still plenty for the government and Prime Minister to do, including the war in Ukraine, the spiralling prices, gas prices, the cost of living crisis. All of these things aren't going away. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why there just don't seem to be other options for him now, because all of these ministers and cabinet ministers have quit or said they won't work with him anymore if they haven't actually quit. And without people in place to run those jobs and those ministries, who's running the country? It isn't really a government in anything but name if there aren't actually any people in role to do the important work of running the country.
And what will the implications be globally as well?
Well, of course, Boris Johnson has had some success with his reputation globally. For example, President Zelensky of Ukraine has been one of his biggest fans on the international stage because of his bold and leading position in terms of the war in Ukraine. And Boris Johnson has, in many respects, gained a lot of respect for that. But that's not really good enough for a prime minister. He's the prime minister of the United Kingdom. And so if members of the Conservative Party and voters in the UK don't approve of him, despite those sorts of actions on the world stage, it means that he can't really stay in place. And I think that's the problem that he's been facing for some time. It's just become more and more apparent that was the situation.
Thank you so much, Jonathan Sacerdoti there, our UK Europe correspondent, joining us all the way from London. Appreciate it.